It is another story about the guy who spent nearly 2 months building a fake stalker from scratch. Fake texts, fake threats, a fake identity, borrowed from a man his own wife hadn't spoken to in over 20 years. He believed it was airtight. He believed police would spend weeks chasing a ghost from her past while he walked free, raising their 3 children as a grieving widower, the victim of a tragedy nobody could ever trace back to him. He was wrong by about 48 hours. This is the story of a husband who very nearly got away with murdering his own wife, using a plan he built himself, piece by piece, over months. A lie that only started unraveling the moment investigators stopped looking at the innocent man he'd framed and started looking at him instead. Welcome to Dead Cold Case, where we take apart murders that were built to never be solved and show you exactly where the plan fell apart. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to hear is one of the most calculated domestic murder plots ever prosecuted in the state of Colorado, and you need to hear exactly how close he came to walking away clean. To understand how this happened, you have to go back to the fall of 2023 in Broomfield, Colorado, a quiet suburb just north of Denver, the kind of place with good schools, tree-lined streets, and neighbors who wave to each other in driveways. Kristil Krug is 43 years old. She's a chemical engineer. She's a mother of 3 young children. By every outward appearance, she and her husband, Daniel, have built exactly the kind of life other people admire from a distance. Both well-educated, both professionally successful, a large home in a good neighborhood, 3 kids. On paper, absolutely nothing about this family looks broken. But sometime that fall, Kristil begins receiving disturbing messages. Texts, emails, someone claiming to be watching her constantly, tracking her movements, threatening both her and her husband. The messages appear to come from a man Kristil dated briefly, more than 20 years earlier. Someone she hadn't spoken to, hadn't thought about in decades. One message reads exactly like this. A suggestion that the sender is often in her area and they should meet up, worded like an old flame trying to reconnect. Another message includes a photograph, Daniel walking into his own workplace, with a caption asking if the man in the photo is her husband. It's designed to terrify both of them simultaneously, to make it look as though the stalker is watching not just Kristil, but her entire family at all times. Daniel even gives this supposed stalker a nickname while speaking with police. He calls him Kickman. Kristil takes this seriously, deadly seriously. She starts carrying a concealed handgun, one given to her by a family friend who tells her the situation sounds serious enough that she needs to start protecting herself immediately. She enrolls in a firearms safety course specifically so she can learn to use it properly if it ever comes to that. She installs security cameras around the outside of the home. She keeps a meticulous, detailed spreadsheet, logging every single message, every date, every specific threat, cross-referencing times and phone numbers with an almost investigative level of precision. She eventually brings the entire log directly to police in October of that year, sitting down with a sergeant to walk him through months of harassment, message by message. On body camera footage from that meeting, you can hear exactly how much this ordeal has already worn her down. She tells the officers it's exhausting, that it's made her paranoid absolutely everywhere she goes. And Daniel, for his part, appears to be suffering right alongside her. In recorded interviews with detectives, he describes panicking inside a grocery store after a complete stranger simply dropped a can behind him, his nervous system so wound up by this point that an ordinary noise sends him into a spiral. He tells detectives, almost apologetically, that he feels like he's doing a terrible job of protecting his own wife, that the stress of it all is eating away at him too. To every single officer who speaks with this couple during this period, Daniel Krug looks exactly like what he is pretending to be. A frightened, overwhelmed husband, desperately trying to shield his family from a threat neither of them can identify or stop. If a story like this already has you leaning in, this is the perfect place to drop a comment telling us what part of this deception has shocked you the most so far, because it only gets more disturbing from here. Police take the threat seriously too. They quietly open an investigation and even conduct undercover surveillance around the family at various points, trying to identify whoever is behind these escalating messages. Officers coordinate with Kristil directly, encouraging her to keep documenting everything, treating the case with the same urgency they would treat any credible ongoing stalking threat. Kristil and Daniel narrow their suspicion down to one specific name from Kristil's distant past. a man now living hundreds of miles away, in Utah. Detectives eventually track him down and interview him directly. His name is Anthony Holland, and it becomes clear almost immediately that he has had no contact whatsoever with Kristil in decades. He's simply living an ordinary life in Utah, entirely unaware that a family in Colorado believes he has been terrorizing them for months. For weeks, this is exactly where the investigation sits, quietly chasing a man who has absolutely nothing to do with any of it, precisely the way Daniel Krug intended all along. Then, on the morning of December 14th, 2023, everything changes. That morning, after Kristil drops their children off at school, Daniel is already waiting for her inside the garage of their own home. Prosecutors would later lay out exactly what happens next, in careful and methodical detail, during his trial. He strikes her from behind with a blunt object. Then he stabs her in the chest, a single fatal wound to the heart. Kristil, who had completed that firearm safety course only 5 days earlier, specifically to protect herself from a threat she genuinely believed was real and external, is killed instead by the one person she should have been safest around in the entire world. She was reportedly wearing her concealed handgun at the time of the attack, the very weapon she'd started carrying because of threats her own husband invented. Before he ever leaves for work that morning, Daniel takes a series of cold, calculated steps, each one designed to buy himself time and distance. He uses Kristil's own phone to disable the home security system, the same system she'd installed specifically because she was afraid. He covers the family's doorbell camera with a strip of blue masking tape. He deactivates the dash camera inside his own vehicle. He even schedules a handful of text messages to send out later that morning, from Kristil's phone, in an attempt to make it appear she is still alive well after he has already killed her. Messages sent to himself, timed to arrive as if she were simply going about a normal morning. Then, almost unbelievably, he stops for coffee. He drives to his job at the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, arriving nearly 30 minutes later than his usual routine. A detailed surveillance footage will later confirm down to the minute. He goes about a normal workday. Sometime around noon, after sending a handful of texts and calls to Kristil that go conveniently unanswered, he calls the Broomfield police non-emergency line. He tells the dispatcher it doesn't quite feel like an emergency exactly, but that something feels really weird, and that his wife isn't responding to messages or calls, a carefully calibrated tone meant to sound concerned without sounding alarmed. Officers arrive at the home just after 12:30 in the afternoon. They find Kristil in the garage, unconscious, with obvious, unmistakable signs of head trauma. She is pronounced dead just 15 minutes later. For the first few hours of this investigation, the story appears tragically straightforward. A stalking case that has finally, horrifyingly, gone all the way. The same man from Utah. The same fictitious threats Kristil had been carefully documenting for months. Investigators immediately loop in police departments in Utah to go check on Anthony Holland, treating him, understandably, as the primary suspect in what looks like the culmination of a months-long campaign of terror. And this is precisely the moment where Daniel Krug's entire plan very nearly works out exactly as he intended. Holland, it turns out, has an alibi that is almost impossible to argue with. On the exact morning of the murder, at 12:16 in the afternoon, he purchases a green sweatshirt at a Kohl's department store in Utah, hundreds of miles away, and roughly an 8-hour drive from the crime scene in Colorado. He still has the receipt. He would later describe that purchase, almost unbelievably, as one of the most important he ever made in his life, since it becomes the single piece of evidence that definitively clears him. Between that purchase and his verified work attendance records from that exact week, investigators are able to rule him out within a matter of hours, not days. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with the words, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. Because the moment investigators cleared Holland is the exact moment this entire case turned in a direction absolutely nobody expected. With their only real suspect completely eliminated, detectives go back to the original threatening messages themselves, and this time they manage to trace them all the way back to their true point of origin. Some of the messages sent to Kristil, it turns out, were transmitted using the Wi-Fi network at Daniel's own workplace. One of the fake email accounts used to harass Kristil had actually been created on a password-protected network there as well, a network that, by definition, only employees would have access to. Investigators also trace a burner phone used throughout the harassment campaign back to a Visa gift card, purchased and registered directly under Daniel's own name, an almost careless mistake buried inside an otherwise meticulous scheme. Cell location data shows that same burner phone traveling to the exact same places as Daniel's personal phone, over and over again, for months on end, the two devices essentially shadowing each other's movements the entire time. One detective would later describe the exact moment this evidence finally clicked into place inside the investigation room. He said it felt like the entire air had been evacuated from the room all at once, as everyone in it simultaneously realized the investigation needed to shift completely, away from Anthony Holland, and squarely onto Daniel himself. Detectives sit down with him directly, face to face. When they ask him plainly who he thinks killed his wife, Daniel still insists it was Kickman. Still insists it was Anthony. When they tell him that Anthony has already been definitively cleared, with a fully verified alibi hundreds of miles away, Daniel's response is chilling in how simple it is. He tells them that if that's true, then he has nothing left, and that he's now terrified to even bring his own children back home. Investigators uncover something else as well. Internet searches on Daniel's own devices, made the night before the murder, including one asking exactly how much head trauma it actually takes to knock a person unconscious. It's the kind of search history that, on its own, might mean very little. Combined with everything else, it becomes damning. And a former girlfriend of Daniel's from decades earlier would eventually testify at trial that he had used disturbingly similar tactics against her. After their relationship ended all those years ago, creating multiple fake online personas specifically to harass her. A pattern investigators say lines up almost perfectly with exactly what he did to Kristil decades later. It suggests this wasn't an isolated impulse born out of one failing marriage, but a method Daniel had apparently returned to more than once across his life, whenever he felt control over a relationship slipping away from him. 2 days after Kristil Krug's murder, Daniel Krug is arrested and formally charged with first-degree murder, stalking, and criminal impersonation. Prosecutors would later lay out a genuinely chilling theory for why he did any of this in the first place. By that fall, Kristil reportedly wanted out of the marriage entirely. She was said to be seeking full custody of their 3 children. Deputy District Attorney Kate Armstrong told jurors plainly that Daniel Krug was losing control, and that his marriage was falling apart around him while he remained in complete, total denial about it. Prosecutors believe the entire fake stalker campaign was originally designed to frighten Kristil into staying close to him, into seeing him as her protector, her hero, the one person standing between her and a danger that, in reality, he alone had created. It's a disturbing psychological pattern that shows up more often than most people realize in cases involving controlling partners. Manufacturing a crisis specifically so you can be the one who rescues someone from it, binding them closer to you through manufactured fear rather than genuine safety. But it didn't work the way he hoped. And prosecutors say that as Kristil continued quietly pulling away from him despite his efforts, his motive shifted into something far darker entirely. If he couldn't have her, he wasn't going to allow anyone else to have her either. In the final days before her murder, Kristil herself had actually begun to suspect the truth. According to Daniel's own recorded police interview, she looked him directly in the face and told him she couldn't rule him out as her stalker. He told her no. Just days later, he killed her. It's a haunting detail that surfaces again and again in cases like this one, that the victim's own instincts were often right, long before anyone else was willing to believe them, including the systems meant to protect her. Daniel Krug did not testify at his own trial. His defense attorney argued that there was no blood found anywhere on his clothing, no direct physical evidence placing him at the actual moment of the attack, and pointed to what he characterized as gaps in the police investigation. But after a trial spanning more than 2 full weeks, in April of 2025, a jury found him guilty on every single count: first-degree murder, stalking, and criminal impersonation. Because a first-degree murder conviction in Colorado carries a mandatory sentence, Judge Priscilla Lowe sentenced Daniel Krug to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 9.5 years to be served consecutively. District Attorney Brian Mason did not mince words after the sentencing. He said this was a brutal, calculated murder, preceded by months of manipulation, emotional abuse, and deception. He said that in planning and carrying out this crime, Daniel Krug terrorized his wife, his children, and an entirely innocent man, all in an effort to control and ultimately murder a woman who simply no longer wanted to be with him. For Kristil's family, the guilty verdict brought a measure of justice, but nowhere near peace. Her cousin, Rebecca Ivanov, has said publicly that she didn't learn the full scope of what Kristil had actually endured. The stalker log, the real content of those threatening messages, until she heard it laid out, piece by piece, inside the courtroom, months after Kristil was already gone. She has described the experience of sitting in that courtroom and realizing, in real time, just how thoroughly her cousin had documented her own fear, how much evidence Kristil herself had assembled trying to protect herself. Evidence that ultimately couldn't save her because it pointed everyone toward the wrong man. What haunts Kristil's family most isn't only what Daniel did. It's how long it took investigators to obtain the digital evidence that could have identified him before he ever got the chance to act at all. Search warrants sent to phone and communications companies back in November of that year, seeking the true identity behind those threatening messages, reportedly took weeks to be answered in full, weeks that Kristil simply didn't have. Her family has since pushed publicly for new legislation requiring communications companies to respond to stalking-related search warrants within 48 hours, arguing that a faster response, even by a matter of days, could have identified Daniel as the true source of the threats while Kristil was still alive to hear it. A legal advocate who assisted Kristil's family on this effort has said her organization has encountered far too many similar cases, where a faster, more diligent response from communications providers could genuinely have been life-saving. The prosecutor's office involved in the case has echoed that same concern publicly, noting that in cases like this one, the line between stalking and killing can be crossed at any moment, which is exactly why response time matters as much as it does. There's a particular kind of horror embedded in this case that separates it from a typical stranger danger story. Kristil Krug did everything the system tells victims to do, and did it well. She documented every single threat in meticulous detail. She went to police early, and she went back repeatedly. She carried a weapon for her own protection. She completed a self-defense course specifically designed to keep her safe. And none of it mattered, because the danger was never coming from a stranger hundreds of miles away in the first place. It was coming from inside her own home, from the man sleeping in the room next to hers, the man she had built an entire life and 3 children alongside. What makes this case so unsettling to investigators, prosecutors, and now to anyone hearing it for the first time, is just how long Daniel was willing to sustain this deception. This wasn't a single impulsive lie told in a moment of panic. It was a sustained, months-long performance, fake threats sent on a schedule, a fabricated digital paper trail built carefully across weeks, an entirely fictional stalker given a name and a motive and a backstory convincing enough that Kristil herself, an intelligent, educated woman, fully believed her life was genuinely in danger from someone else. He didn't just kill his wife. He spent nearly 2 months first convincing her, and the people meant to protect her, that the threat was coming from anywhere but him. And it very nearly worked. If Anthony Holland hadn't kept that Kohl's receipt, if his employer's attendance records hadn't lined up so precisely, down to the exact hours, if investigators had spent even a few more days fully convinced they were chasing a man in Utah instead of turning their attention back toward Broomfield, the digital trail leading back to Daniel's workplace Wi-Fi and his gift card-registered burner phone might have gone cold before anyone thought to look for it at all. Cases like this one are a sobering reminder that a killer doesn't need to be a criminal mastermind to nearly succeed. He simply needs to understand, intimately, what an investigation expects a real crime to look like, and build every false detail specifically to match that expectation. This case also fits into a pattern that criminal justice researchers and investigators have increasingly identified over the past several years, what's sometimes referred to as a stage stranger homicide, where an intimate partner constructs an elaborate external threat, often over an extended period, specifically to create cover for a murder they're already planning. Unlike a crime of sudden passion, these cases tend to involve significant premeditation, a slow escalation designed to establish a believable timeline of danger, and often, as in this case, an entirely innocent third party who ends up temporarily under suspicion simply because they fit the narrative the killer built. It's part of why these cases can be so difficult to unravel quickly. The killer isn't reacting to an investigation, he's anticipating one, and shaping the evidence to lead somewhere else long before the crime ever happens. That's the part of this case that should genuinely stay with you. Not simply that a husband was capable of this, but how close an elaborate, months-long deception came to succeeding, purely because it was built by someone who understood exactly what an investigation would expect a real stalking case to look like, and constructed every single piece of false evidence specifically to match it. Kristil Krug did everything right. She protected herself the only way she knew how, against a threat that turned out to be standing right beside her the entire time. Her 3 children lost their mother 11 days before Christmas, to the one parent who was supposed to keep all of them safe. And while Daniel Krug will spend the rest of his life in prison, that sentence doesn't undo the fact that the system charged with protecting Kristil had almost everything it needed to stop this, and simply didn't move fast enough. If this case disturbed you the way it disturbed all of us researching it, this is exactly the kind of story Dead Cold Case exists to cover. Hit that like button so more people understand exactly how close this entire plan came to actually working. Drop a comment below and let us know whether you saw the husband coming before the reveal, or whether Anthony Holland's story had you convinced right along with investigators. And make sure you're subscribed, because there is always another case out there where the truth turns out to be far more disturbing than the story anyone was originally told.